This is not a Black Panther, it's an SPD-SX Pro with a little bit of a dent on the box. That's annoying. So first things first, I like the box. It's far more interesting than usual, but let's open it up. I mean, it all looks pretty standard, right? Power cable, and the rest of the power cable. See ya. Manual. And there we have it. First impressions straight off the bat are that the pads look a tiny bit smaller. I don't know if that's just down to these grooves or whether they actually are. I'll have a look at my original model in a minute. The shoulder pads definitely feel a little bit different in the hand as well. In fact, the whole of this side of the unit just feels chunkier in general. Now, apparently it's the same chassis, so I don't think it should do, but it really does feel that way. The whole of this section here just feels far more spacious, and everything feels as good as you would hope for, you know, a product that cost as much as this. Infinite encoder over here. These ones are infinite too, but they don't make the same noise. I'm a big fan of the large screen before I've even plugged it in. I think it looks really good, but let's get it set up and then I'll compare it a little bit to the original SPD-SX, which I've got on my shelf just over there. Well, it appears that I've been the victim of an optical illusion because these face pads are the same size as these face pads. As soon as I set them up next to each other, it became very obvious, but I have measured them just in case. However, the shoulder pads are significantly different. You'll see on the original SPD-SX, the shoulder pads are quite wide and they don't actually protrude that much higher than the regular pads, if at all. On the Pro model, these are slimmer, but they are raised more, so I think that will make them far more effective. The other things that are contributing towards this illusion are the LEDs between the pads. It makes the spacing of the pads look slightly different, and the size of this control panel on the front is far larger on the Pro than it is on the original because it doesn't have this thick plastic bar on it. So obviously that's great because it gives you the bigger screen and there's some more dials here. However, if you can see in the lighting, there's a lot of stick marks on this plastic bar because my aim is not really that great. And if I can get the lighting just right, you'll see that there's a stick mark on the screen, which I did on the first day that I owned this. So the first thing that I'm going to do is try to find a screen protector that will fit the SPD-SX Pro because I'm pretty much guaranteed to hit that thing. I also mentioned earlier that the side felt chunkier on the Pro than it did on the original, but you'll see that they're pretty similar, and I think it all comes down to the sort of contouring on the original model, and this little bit of, I'm not sure whether it's metal or plastic that's screwed onto the side. That general shape and the difference in the materials makes it feel a little bit less bulky, and also a little bit less plasticky than the Pro. So it's a real shame that they didn't do something similar on here, because that actually feels a little bit more premium than this one, and this one is £400 more. Now, the back of each unit is significantly different, and of course you've got all the extra trigger inputs and the hi-hat controller input on this one, which you just don't have on the original model. But one thing that I didn't notice when I saw the initial images is the fact that the on and off button, well, it's now a switch, has been moved onto the back. I actually think that's a really good move because I had some problems eventually with my SPD-SX, where the power button stopped working properly. Now, I have had this pad for about 10 years, so eventually you're going to get some kind of failures, but I've heard that it was reasonably common for the buttons on the front to eventually stop working properly, and also PCB failures at the back, which I've experienced issues with myself. The outputs became a little bit intermittent after a while. In fact, when I did a video a while back showing off how I use tracks on my SPD-SX, I actually used my bandmate's SPD-SX, which is newer, because that's what we've been using for gigs recently. So I'm really hoping that those things have been addressed. Now, of course, everything's still plastic in terms of the jacks at the back, but they have changed the buttons on the front so that they're clickier, whereas they used to be a lot softer in response. So I do wonder whether they've changed that so that it puts a bit less pressure on the PCB underneath. Right, time to boot this up and see how it goes. So a few things that I've noticed while trying it out for the first time. The sensitivity of the pads really has improved over the original. You can play the face pads with your fingers really easily, and even the shoulder pads with only a little bit more force. The stock settings of the pads had me maxing it out a little bit too quickly, but that's something that should always be adjusted to taste anyway. Pretty much every stock kit preset is set up with a kick sound on the bottom left pad, a snare or a snare surrogate on the bottom middle pad, and a hi-hat that can be operated with a controller on the bottom right. The kick drum sound is also usually doubled up on input 1, so you can just stick a pedal straight in there and start playing with your feet rather than your hands if you want to. There are one or two kits that don't follow this exact setup, and there's just one kit that has all of the trigger inputs assigned as a full mini kit setup. And the stock presets aren't terribly exciting. They do cover a reasonable range of styles, and some of them show off the more interesting features, but overall they're pretty similar to what you would expect from a Roland drum module, only with the playability of a sample pad. But that's not really a big criticism in my opinion, because I didn't buy a pad like this to play the stock sounds. I'll be loading my own samples and backing tracks. There are also a lot more samples on board than are shown off on the kit presets. To give an example, there are only 43 preset kits, but there are 235 kick drum samples preloaded. So there's a ton of choice that's not shown off at all by the stock presets, and that's pretty great to be honest, because it means you don't need to worry if you don't have a big sample collection of your own. Now, the most important thing for me beyond this was that it retained the ability to swap between kits while the sample continues from a previous kit. Unfortunately, that feature remains. This is part of the reason that I could never bring myself to try out the Alesis Strike Multipad. I regularly swap kits live with the tail of a previous sample ringing out, and the Strike Multipad cuts off any samples when you swap kits. That's just no good for me, and if for some reason that didn't still work on the SPD-SX Pro, it would have been going straight back. There are a couple of small exceptions that at first had me worried, because I'd been directed to a comment online that suggested that there are bugs and that sounds do cut out, but I'm pretty certain that I've worked it out. If you load up a kit that uses some multi-effects and then swap between two more kits, letting them fully load, you might experience sound dropouts. This is not the sample itself that's dropping out, it's the effects tail. These are per kit effects like reverb, delay, that kind of thing. But I've not seen this happen with the tail of the master effects, which is a different set of global effects. It's basically a non-issue in most uses, and I'm not that surprised that it can't store the effects tails of a bunch of different kits. The upgrades to the pad link function are going to make a big difference for me live as well. I'll no longer need to do any weird workarounds to be able to split up my backing tracks. If you want to know more about how I set up my old SPD-SX to run backing tracks live, check out this video right here. It's full of tips and tricks to solve some problems that you could very easily run into. I'll have a full review of the SPD-SX Pro down the line, but really, I want to try it out live first. And with that, have a great day and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!